And when you say pick up a camera and shoot a movie, you have to understand that means you're crazy. That means you when you pick up that camera and you look through and you start shooting, if something happens like a drug, and you gotta keep going until you make your picture.
Some bad ideas in my head.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
If your mother cooks Italian food, why should you go to a restaurant? It was the fall of 42 New York. Here, in a poor neighborhood of Manhattan, in Little Italy on Elizabeth Street, there lived a family of second-generation immigrants. Charles and Catherine Scorsese grew up in neighboring houses, with their windows literally facing each other. Their first date was on the fire escape, and they had their wedding on the roof. All their lives, the couple worked at a sewing factory. Catherine started working there at 12 after finishing primary school. Middle school was too expensive for her parents, so they got her a job sewing doll clothes. As for Charles, the whole neighborhood knew about his talent. Show him a suit, and he would recreate it to the last detail. After the wedding, Kat never had to buy a dress because her husband sewed dresses for her. In 1935, Kat and Charlie had their first son, Frank, and on the 17th of November 1942, their second son, whom they named Martin. The couple realized that the cramped apartment in the concrete slums, teeming with criminals, was no place to raise children. The minute Catherine was discharged from the hospital, they packed their things and moved to a better neighborhood, where they rented half a house. Marty was a sickly child and was diagnosed with asthma from birth. In the 40s, an inhaler was not enough, and he went to the hospital more often than his peers went to preschool. Nonetheless, Charles's business was growing, and these hardships did not cause panic. Weekly trips to the movie theater and comic store was just a small part of the lucky 4-year-old's childhood. His older brother would take him to double features at the nearby theater, and once they convinced their religious mother to let him see a movie not sanctioned by the church. Jewel in the Sun amazed the young viewer. The music by Dmitri Tiomkin was both terrifying and hypnotizing. Gregory Peck and Jennifer Jones also enchanted him.
No, if I'm not good enough to marry, I'm not good enough to kiss.
During the finale, the little boy got so scared that he burrowed into the seat and covered his eyes with his hands. But his mother made him open them and yelled, "Look at it! You took me here to see it. Now watch it."
I love you.
Oh, don't cry, honey. Don't cry.
In 48, Charles was the first of his neighbors to buy a television set.
This is a 16-inch RCA Victor television set. It's the same kind that my father bought in the late 40s.
Life changed forever when the first TV shows and cheap TV movies opened the portal to another world. It was a place with no asthma, allergies, or fits, where the dream of becoming a cowboy seemed real and imagination was not limited by the laws of physics. Father and son shared a love for film, and Charles took him to see Ladri de Bicyclette and Rome Open City, films which caused every Italian to reminisce about a homeland he'd never seen. The fairy tale came to an end when, in 1948, Charlie's business collapsed. Scorsese had to return to Little Italy. The cramped one-room belonging to Charles's parents had to house 6 for half a year until they could find their own cramped one room. Movie theaters were replaced with the third-floor window of their house, while the landscape below was more terrifying than the finale of Jewel in the Sun. I certainly wasn't able to get it when I was a kid growing up on the Lower East Side. It was very hard at that time for me to balance what I really believed was the right way to live with the violence I saw all around me. I saw too much of it among the people I knew. Martin was not allowed to go outside. It was no place for healthy children, not to mention a weak and sickly boy. His world perspective was shaped by his window and the TV screen. He distracted himself by transporting the scenes he saw on TV to paper, and even dreamed of becoming an artist. In the future, these little sketches would become film storyboards, and his attention to detail would help him fill the library of his cinema-loving mind with the plots and names of every film he watched. But years passed, and he started going to school so he could no longer hide in front of the TV screen. The mean streets began to leave their mark on his upbringing. There were 2 languages of power on Elizabeth Street, the mafia and the church. The priests were the only ones the mafia submitted to. Martin found his chance at a spotless career where there was no place for fear. The frail young man, nothing like the future Carlo Gambino, decided to dedicate his life to faith. In 1951, he had his first communion and started studying at the Catholic school, where for the next 5 years he would dream of the priesthood. He served in St. Patrick's Church and later even attended a seminary high school. There was room for his first love in his new world. A priest helped the boys analyze films from I Confess by Alfred Hitchcock.
I confess to Almighty God and to you, brother, that I have sinned.
To On the Waterfront, directed by Elia Kazan.
Well, I thought there'd be more of you here, but...
At school, they studied ideas, dissected problems, and found biblical motifs in the plots.
You're in the church if I need you. Did you ever hear of a saint hiding in a church?
The youth was moving in the right direction, but puberty forced him to look at the world from a different perspective. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll infiltrated his life in the reverse order.
Ain't nobody but you, babe. Now you go. No, ain't nobody but you, babe. Now I'm alone.
But even the music was enough to change his plans. Up until he finished middle school, he was still thinking about the church, but his dreams changed from the moment in 1959 when he got his hands on his friend's 8mm camera. In a day, he drew a storyboard for his future reel about ancient Rome, climbed onto a roof with his friends where they put on bed sheets and filmed the short Vesuvius 6. Unfortunately, only drawings are left of this epic story. The director only had to watch it once to realize that it must not be allowed to see the light of day, and that he needed a drastic change in his life. I don't really see a conflict between the church and the movies, the sacred and the profane. There are major differences, but I could also see great similarities. Both are places for people to come together and share. Charles and Catherine dreamed of a better life for their sons, but their low income did not stand in the way of paying for Martin's education at NYU. The new world amazed him. Before, he was surrounded by poverty and violence, and now by happy classmates from wealthy families who loved cinema and admired him. For the white-collared kids, he represented a mysterious and brutal world, which they usually only saw in the movies. As for the library of pictures, scenes, and quotes which Scorsese could recall at a moment's notice, they put a spell on his teachers. His professor from the cinematic arts department, Haig Manoogian, turned into his greatest fan, and the feeling was mutual. Within the walls of the university, European neo-realism was worshipped, and Truffaut and Godard were like their gods.
Si vous n'aimez pas la ville, allez vous faire foutre.
Manoogian expected that his students would make films about what they knew best, themselves. He ordered them to grab their cameras and walk the streets to document real life. But school was no walk in the park. As the only student who couldn't afford even an amateur camera like the 8mm Kodak M2, while his classmates were filming every day working towards their films, Martin had to be content with 1 or 2 days a month when he was able to borrow a camera from his friends. But even in these short deadlines, Scorsese was able to create masterpieces. Jim McBride said, "He was on a whole other level from the rest of us. He could quote films to you, describe them shot by shot. While we were humping around trying to find the right exposure, he was making these little gems."
And the room was nice? All I needed was a little fixing up, so I fixed it up.
While working on the first short film of his career, he met the editor-director Thelma Schoonmaker, who saved his work from the clumsy attempts at cutting his film himself.
Even my friends began to notice in me that there seemed to be something amiss.
You know, Harry, there seems to be something amiss.
The real "What's a Nice Girl Like You Doing in a Place Like This" was not only his debut, but the beginning of a lifelong friendship.
I have a vivid imagination. Even my friends say it.
You know, Harry, you got a vivid imagination.
His second school project was the crime comedy short called It's Not Just You, Murray.
But then again, you know, in this life, you only got so much luck.
The main character, a man who badly wanted to be a gangster, would lay the foundation for the characters in Mean Streets, Goodfellas, and Casino.
And then you can give him all he deserves.
The drama received an award for the best student film from the Producers Guild and brought him his first moment of glory. Also, while he was filming, he met the young actress Lorraine Marie Brennan, who was also studying at NYU. In 1965, Marty got married and a year later celebrated the birth of their daughter. The daughter was named Catherine in honor of her grandmother. Life was good, especially since Paramount Studios offered the rising star a paid summer internship. He was already packing his suitcase when he received an apology letter. The studio was changing its policy and no longer required his services. So, as you do when you have a wife and baby and a bunch of bills with no prospects, you make a feature film. While at a summer internship with his classmate Michael Wadley, who became his cameraman, Marty began making a melodrama based on his own 33-page script. They invited Harvey Keitel to play the main role, who was an amateur stage actor who worked as a stenographer at a courthouse.
Well, I am, as they say, at the moment, sort of in between, at this time, sort of in between positions.
The director's father went to the bank and took out $6,000, becoming the first investor in his son's career. The money was spent on film reel and buying other small items, since there was no official budget. Wadley was the only one with a car, so he transported all the equipment, while the director, actors, and film crew had to make their way to the locations on foot or by bus. They filmed only on the weekends, wherever they were able to, whether at the Scorsese's, at the local church, or at the director's grandmother's house. Since these locations were not intended for filming, after the lights and cameras were installed, there was hardly any space for the actors to act. When they tried to film outside, they were usually interrupted by aggressive homeless people or curious children. Martin Scorsese said, "It was all stopping and starting. You started shooting a scene, then 2 months later, when you wanted to reshoot, the actors had cut their hair or had another job and couldn't work. It was a nightmare." The first draft was finished just in time to premiere at the New York Film Festival in '65. The audience didn't quite get the hour-long melodrama called Bring On the Dancing Girls.
Boy, this picture's so bad.
But the director at the festival saw the potential and wrote a letter to Professor Haig Manoogian asking him to help his student remake the film. Haig responded by finding a sponsor among the students in the directing department, Joseph Vale. The successful lawyer considered film his hobby and had no problem investing $37,000 into the picture. Manoogian and Scorsese went to the editing room and left only the best scenes. Haig convinced the director to rewrite the script, escalate the conflict, as well as coming up with a resolution. The new text took Martin 6 months to write. During that time, he got a job at the CBS TV channel where he edited news clips.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Charles Kuralt in the CBS newsroom in New York.
And also made a documentary commissioned by the United States Information Agency called New York City Melting Point. In the winter of 1966, the director resumed filming the drama, which was renamed I Call First.
I choose, I call first. You can't call first. Who you call?
Martin was able to get both Michael Wadley and Harvey Keitel back in the project, who hadn't gotten his hopes very high anyways. A year and a half of film had exhausted him. He had a tendency to show up with a new haircut one day and the next forget his costume.
It just doesn't seem real, does it? It just doesn't make any sense.
But Scorsese turned a blind eye to these things, partially because he respected Keitel's talent, and partially because he knew that changing the main character would kill his picture.
That's right.
It took 3 months to film the second version, and the reel was finished by the summer of '67.
That was some picture. Some picture.
It premiered at the Chicago Film Festival, but the director didn't attend, not in protest or because of a conflict with the producer. Martin just didn't have enough money for a bus ticket to Chicago. His budget had grown, but he still did not have enough, and his debts grew in proportion with the amount of material he filmed. When, after the showing, they offered the young director a chance to release the film in limited theaters, he felt he was on top of the world. He rejoiced until he found out that without buying the rights to the music, the reel couldn't be shown in any commercial theater. After 2 weeks of haunting the music labels, he was granted only 2 of the 10 tracks. This destroyed his dream of packed theaters, but then his friend came to him with an unusual request. In 2 weeks, the thriller, The Honeymoon Killers, was supposed to start shooting in New York. The producers had a script, actors, and a budget, but they lacked only a director.
I met with Martin Scorsese, and he loved the script, and we were in business.
Scorsese went on to create the visual style for the reel and think through every frame. However, his bursts of creativity and obsession with French directors drove his bosses crazy within the first week.
I realized the way he was doing it that, well, we had $150,000 and we had 7 weeks, and that we would never, ever get through.
For the first 6 days, he professed his belief in natural film and shot every scene in one take.
He's so gone.
On the 7th day, the cameraman, Oliver Wood, spent 50 takes trying to catch a can of beer falling onto the pavement, but the scene didn't make the final cut, because that evening Scorsese was fired for the first and last time.
The producer was not happy at all. Martin wasn't happy, and so he left after a week.
His assistant, Donald Volkman, was promoted, and he finished filming. This indie production became a cult film and received positive reviews from Francois Truffaut, who called it his favorite American film. In addition, the popular video rental store Blockbuster included it in its top 100 films of all time.
Well, it doesn't look too bad. I'll just have to get used to it, I guess.
Those who were close to the film knew that Scorsese's ideas and drawings were used for the film, but the director left without making a scene. As for Volkman and his producers, The Honeymoon Killers was the last film of their careers.
And I'm the one who should be angry.
Martin's anger and disillusionment were reflected in his next cutting social commentary short, The Big Shave, which amazed New York's beau monde and enchanted critics.
Blown around the world.
The short fit in everything from metaphors about the war in Vietnam to high levels of nihilism into 5 minutes. After an unsuccessful period in 1969, Manoogian got Scorsese a job as his personal assistant at the university. For a whole year, he was busy with a stable and, most importantly, paying job. In that year, he oversaw students like Jonathan Kaplan and Oliver Stone. The university sent him to Europe to attend some of the main film festivals of 1969. Thanks to this trip, he made a few acquaintances, and in Amsterdam, he was approached by the exploitation films distributor Joseph Brenner. Joe offered to take care of the song rights for his film and release I Call First in hundreds of theaters.
I don't believe you.
I wouldn't lie to you.
The only condition was that he add an erotic nude scene which would help advertise it and turn it into a sexploitation film. Martin immediately brought Keitel to the Dutch capital, where 2 days later, in a cramped room, he paid for the time of a dozen free-spirited women and shot the needed scene, combining it with the Doors' song The End. 10 years later, this impromptu scene would serve as the inspiration for the opening frames of Apocalypse Now. Brenner was amazed by what he saw, and he also changed the title to Who's That Knocking at My Door in honor of the first lines of the song of Who's That Knocking by the Genies. Under this title, the picture took the drive-in movies by storm, where it made its first profit.
That's a good picture. Good. That picture was great.
In 1969, a journalist from Time magazine, Jay Cox, was researching talented young directors from New York and became interested in Scorsese. Martin charmed Cox, who, as a result, helped him to get into closed premieres, film festivals, and even convinced the famous American director John Cassavetes to take a look at his friend's debut reel. Who's That Knocking at My Door amazed Cassavetes. John Cassavetes said, "This movie is as good as Citizen Kane." This review left Scorsese speechless. He couldn't believe his ears. This great director, basically his idol, was saying these things about his film. The meeting gifted Scorsese with yet another friend. While Martin was fighting for the release of his debut picture, Michael Wadley founded the film company Paradigm Pictures and gathered some of his NYU classmates under one roof. The main editor became Thelma Schoonmaker. Paradigm's main focus was modern documentaries and television shows. Scorsese was often invited to work on various jobs. The company gave him a chance to direct an episode of The Monkees, a popular TV show about the adventures of a rock and roll band which often featured amateur directors. Later that year, Wadley took on the biggest project of his career, the documentary Woodstock. He headed up a film crew of 15 people, which was an impossible task for one person. This is why he asked Thelma to be his assistant director and Martin to take charge of some of the cameramen and film extra material. On the morning of the 15th of August 1969, Scorsese and Schoonmaker got into his old white Corvette and set off for Wallkill to one of the biggest rock festivals in America. This job was a nightmare for a young man who rarely left the boundaries of Queens. In 3 days, Mills Park was visited by over 500,000 people. They faced unsanitary conditions, drugs, and the unrelenting wave of decibels which made Martin drop the walkie-talkies and spend 72 hours yelling to his cameramen over the greatest musicians on the planet. one point, Marty tried to take a nap in the pup tent under the stage. He knocked over the pole and the whole thing collapsed. He had claustrophobia and was screaming for somebody to help him. But he wasn't Martin Scorsese yet. He was just some schmuck from Little Italy. On Monday morning, the 19th of August, Jimi Hendrix appeared on the stage after his performance had been delayed 10 hours. He played his set in front of the remaining audience and was a fitting finale for the weekend, which had given the world a weekend of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Having returned to New York, the team realized that it had filmed over 120 miles of material. Wadley asked Martin and Thelma to help edit. It took 4 grueling months to make a 3-hour film, with the director's cut being an extra 50 minutes. Its first screenings won the critics over. Wadley was able to show what it was like to be at Woodstock.
500,000 young people can get together and have 3 days of fun and music, and have nothing but fun and music, and I God bless you for it.
The rights to the release and distribution were immediately acquired by Warner Brothers. Michael sold the rights for $600,000, and over the next 2 months, Woodstock brought the studio over $50 million. Success followed all who were connected to the project. Wadley got an Oscar for Best Documentary, and Thelma Schoonmaker was nominated for Best Editing. And though Scorsese was left out of his friend's glory, Warner had an even better surprise for him. I look for a thematic idea running through my movies, and I see that it's an outsider struggling for recognition. I realize that all my life I've been an outsider, and above all, being lonely and never realizing it. Riding the wave of Woodstock's success, Warner Brothers invested money into a similar project. Producer Fred Weintraub, who had purchased Wadley's reel for Warner, wanted to make money off of every festival in the US. A month after the picture's release, Fred hired director Francois Reichenbach to make the documentary Medicine Ball Caravan, which depicted the traveling festival Caravan of Love that was nicknamed Woodstock on Wheels. The film crew traveled 8,000 miles with the musicians and recorded the performances of B.B. King and Alice Cooper. Hundreds of cities and dozens of concerts. However, after 3 months of editing, the pre-screening mortified Weintraub. The screening lasted 9 hours, though the plot gets lost after the first 10 minutes. The next day, Warner fired Reichenbach and his team. Someone at the studio suggested that the producer ask Scorsese for help, and Fred called him out to Los Angeles. His 2-week contract stretched out for 6 months. Martin cut the time down to 1/9 of the original and was able to combine the material in a new way. The result satisfied Weintraub, but the film was still a flop. Martin didn't want to return to New York since California was the place where films were made. He decided to stay in LA, even though it meant shipwrecking his marriage. Lorraine was not about to move to the other side of the country with a child in tow. Scorsese was brought up strictly Catholic, so when he left his family, he knew he was committing a terrible deed. However, he was not able to betray his first love, cinema, and left Lorraine and Catherine forever. The world of cinema did not receive Martin with open arms. Adult life was hard for the director. After working on Medicine Ball Caravan, he wandered Hollywood aimlessly, and John Cassavetes got him a job as a sound editor for his melodrama, Minnie and Moskowitz.
You're a funny guy. I don't think of myself as funny. That's why I'm funny. I mean, if you think of yourself as funny, you become tragic.
$500 a week and a place to sleep on set were the best conditions he could have been offered in Los Angeles. Besides Cassavetes, in LA, he only knew Brian De Palma. The directors were introduced to each other in 1965, became friends, and from time to time hung out at different studios, festivals, and parties in Beverly Hills, which were held by their more successful colleagues. During one of these events at Fred Weintraub's house, he met the producer's daughter, Sandy. The girl was just as obsessed with film and took him to double and triple features and seemed to know even more about the movies than him. The couple lived together for the next 4 years. In the autumn of 1970, Sandy, Brian, and Martin went to a film festival in Sorrento. It was another lame attempt to network, with one exception. It actually turned out to be successful. Scorsese was introduced to Francis Ford Coppola on the first night. They dueled using their knowledge of cinema and rock music instead of bullets or swords. Those who saw them together that night thought that they were brothers. The tall, moody, bearded Coppola, and next to him, a minimized copy, the lean Scorsese. Coppola got a deal for the adaptation of The Godfather and went to New York to research. Martin volunteered to help. Francis agreed and happily ate pasta at Scorsese's parents' house in Little Italy, and in order to improve the accents used in the film, taped Charles Scorsese speaking while Martin's mother gave him advice about choosing actors, and tried to convince Coppola that there was no way he could film the picture in 100 days. Martin took him to Elizabeth Street, showed him around Little Italy, and even helped choose some of the key locations. A few months later, he was a regular guest on Coppola's set. At the same time, his success in documentary film attracted the attention of producers, and he was entrusted with the editing of yet another musical documentary. Elvis on Tour showed the American king of rock and roll on tour, as well as showed behind-the-scenes footage and provided a short biography of Presley's life.
There we go.
Easy. Good show. Good show.
For over a year, Martin couldn't get work in the movie business. He obviously hadn't thought through his move to LA and had been following a naive dream. When Cassavetes' assistant received a call with the request to find Scorsese because Roger Corman wanted him to direct his next film, he was answered with a laugh and a dial tone. However, the proposal turned out to be real. The famous exploitation film producer truly wanted to meet Martin, and 3 days later he was already sitting in the office of New World Pictures. Corman had gone to a repeat showing of Who's That Knocking at My Door at Coppola's insistence, with whom he had made horror films in the early 60s. Roger was impressed with the young director's talent, and he decided to give the young man a shot. For a year, he'd been planning to film the sequel to his favorite work, the crime drama Bloody Mama, where Shelley Winters shone next to a young Bruce Dern and Robert De Niro.
My eyes have seen the glory.
Hallelujah!
Hallelujah.
Roger offered him Barbara Hershey and David Carradine for the main roles, a budget of $600,000 and 24 full filming days with complete artistic freedom with the screenplay called Boxcar Bertha, on one condition, that there be nude scenes, explosions, and violence at least every 15 pages. Scorsese did not waste any time, and in 2 weeks invited Corman to a presentation of his adaptation of the text. The producer expected to come to a read-through of the script, but Martin was so afraid of repeating his mistakes from Honeymoon Killers that he had already planned most of the scenes. For the first, but not last time, Roger did not regret his choice and only added the classic B-movie rule. The film should have a shocking opening and a bloody finale. November of 1971 was the best in Martin's life to date. After 8 years of trying to get into the exclusive film society, he now found himself at its very heart.
Just grabbing something good when it comes by.
Working with the professional film crew brought him back to his college days. The cinematographer, Paul Rapp, showed him how to light the scene, shoot in one direction, and then changed the position of the equipment. The team had spent years honing its filming skills in low-budget films and offered the director the most important lessons of his career.
It's gonna be all right.
Sure.
In addition to Hershey and Carradine teaching him how to work with actors. Scrupulous preparation allowed Martin to experiment on set, and he delved into the world of improvisation.
If you want to leave, there are no chains on you, honey.
You're dumb.
The erotic scenes were especially successful. The year before, Barbara and David had gotten married, so the camera didn't interfere with their displays of affection. Scorsese milked the typical grindhouse plot for all it was worth. In January of the next year, he finished the first draft and set up a private viewing for John Cassavetes.
Drunk as hell, I'm talking about hellfire, hellfire, oh hellfire, that's where I'm bound. I'm talking about hellfire, hellfire, oh hellfire, that's where I'm bound.
John Cassavetes said, "Marty, you just spent the whole year of your life making a piece of shit. It's a good picture, but you're better than the people who make that kind of movie. Don't get hooked into the exploitation market. Just try and do something different."
Oh.
Boxcar Bertha was released in the Grindhouse theaters. Together with The Drama Killers 3, it reaped a profit, and as you would expect from a B-movie, got terrible press reviews. Corman was pleased and offered him a new project. The idea was simple: ride out the popularity of Shaft by making their own blaxploitation film. But after Cassavetes' words, Martin said no without even considering it.
I just not meant for this kind of life.
He started dreaming of making his own movie. Together with his childhood friend Mardik Martin, he wrote a screenplay called Witch Season, which after 27 rewrites became Mean Streets. The characters were based on the ones from Who's That Knocking at My Door, and the main role was once again played by Harvey Keitel. While Scorsese's agent looked for sponsors, the director was gathering a film crew and acting ensemble. After Boxcar Bertha, it was an easy task. Many who had worked on his last project happily joined Mean Streets, from cameramen, sound editors, and lighting technicians to David Carradine. For the role of Johnny Boy, Marty chose Robert De Niro, a young actor who had already acted in some pictures and at that time was acting in a humble play in New York. Scorsese and De Niro had known each other from childhood, grew up not too far from each other, and sometimes saw each other at local parties, but had never been friends. And now, 15 years later, after seeing Brian De Palma's reel, the director immediately found a special connection to De Niro. Perhaps it was because of Bob's unusual for an actor humility, which even caused friends and casting directors to think he was slightly autistic.
Don't be cute. You have me going crazy here.
Yeah?
What's the matter with you?
What's the matter with you?
Shooting was delayed for only one reason: lack of money. That was when Francis Ford Coppola came to the rescue again and invested his personal finances into the project. Together with Martin's savings, it was about $300,000. It was a tiny sum, but the director was so inspired by the idea that he would have filmed it even without a budget.
What's this? Swap. This. What? That. What does this look like? Huh? What? Where'd you get this?
Filming in New York was a luxury, so Scorsese spent only 6 days there. He couldn't even buy tickets for his team from LA and had to use freshmen from Haig Manoogian's department to help him. Their work was at best unprofessional. One of the assistants forgot to give the director a reel of film which had half of the scenes in the car and the wide shots of De Niro, after which he disappeared completely. Martin had to get creative with the editing.
Look at this, embarrassing. Look at this.
Shooting on location took days. They shot everything from apartment building stairs in Little Italy to Elizabeth Street, to the cemetery at St. Patrick's Cathedral, to the Feast of San Gennaro, which was the main event of September. They shot everything that couldn't be reproduced in Los Angeles. A week later, the director was reunited with his team and spent another 21 days filming the indoor scenes. Problems followed him everywhere. The fight scene in the pool bar took 3 days to film because they had to move the lighting arrangements over 26 times for lack of equipment. A defining aspect of the cinematography was the so-called handheld camera method. Instead of the typical rails and carts, the camera was held by hand. What would later be dubbed an original move and a nod to the works of Goddard was actually just an attempt to save money. The camera attached to Keitel's torso, that, however, was an example of Martin's resourcefulness. Later, the director locked himself in a stuffy room and started editing his precious movie. Since neither he nor Thelma Schoonmaker were members of the Editors Guild, they actually didn't technically have the right to do what they were doing. But a member of the Guild Society, Levine, helped them out. First, he helped them with advice and mentoring, and later agreed to let them put his name on the credits. They had used the same method when editing Boxcar Bertha. It cost another $300,000 to buy the rights to the music used on the film, which pushed the budget over the $500,000 mark and made Martin's debts grow monstrously big.
You don't know what happened to me. I'm so depressed about other things. I can't worry about payments, you know what I mean?
Scorsese showed the first editing draft to Coppola, who immediately offered De Niro a role in the second installment of The Godfather. A week later, the film premiered at Cannes. Mean Streets received rave reviews, and Martin and Robert joined the Italian film Beau Monde, along with Federico Fellini. After that, the team went to the New York Film Festival, where the film officially premiered. Mean Streets was a hit. Critics bombarded the newspaper columns with glowing reviews, and the pile of letters offering Martin collaboration grew. Surprisingly, this period of success was marked by the director's own poverty. Scorsese spent the summer of 1973 searching for a distributor for the film. His hopes were set on Paramount since they'd sponsored The Godfather, and that meant they had connections with the top people and that they would be interested in crime dramas. But the test screening was a failure. The studio's vice president, Peter Bart, walked out halfway through the film saying, "Don't waste my time." 2 months before, the director had been blacklisted at Paramount because of his connections. Coppola had been dodging making a sequel in the Italian mob saga and had been suggesting Scorsese in his place. Peter had watched Boxcar Bertha and told Francis, "Anyone but him." Thankfully, there was no need for sadness since the representatives of Warner Brothers fell in love with Mean Streets. The producers, who had grown up on those same streets, were thrilled with the depiction of New York and were also familiar with the actors and saw serious potential in them. In addition, the head of the studio couldn't stand Fred Weintraub, and when he saw his daughter play Johnny Boy's girlfriend in the reel,
Had the Weintraub, right?
he vowed to show the film in every theater in the country. Scorsese was overjoyed because he had sold his film to a studio which, in his mind, had been distributing the best gangster movies of all time. Despite the rave reviews and praise from critics, the film was not successful at the box office. It wasn't because audiences didn't like the film, but because of foolishness on the studio's part. The movie was advertised as a gangster ballad, and its success at Cannes and New York were not mentioned. 3 days after the premiere, Warner also released The Exorcist. The horror film eclipsed the low-budget indie crime drama, and if there was any chance left of success, it was totally crushed by the re-release 2 weeks later of A Clockwork Orange and Deliverance. This was a battle that the director's original work with no-name actors could not compete with. It's amazing that Scorsese was able to return his debts and even make a little profit.
Tonight, Live, the 46th Annual Academy Award presentation.
It's no surprise that the picture was not mentioned at the Oscars. However, The Exorcist got 10 nominations, including Best Supporting Actress.
You know what she did? Your canting daughter?
And though fate did not smile on Ellen Burstyn that evening, Warner wanted to make another film with her. The actress wanted to do the movie based on Robert Getschell's screenplay, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. The studio agreed and suggested that she chose the director herself. First, Ellen went to Coppola, who recommended that she watch Mean Streets. Burstyn was attracted to the realism and agreed to meet with Martin, who, being a nervous person by nature, could barely contain himself when he found out. For him, the meeting would not only mean getting to meet Ellen, but possibly the first studio movie in his career. The actress was worried that the director had rarely given attention to female characters.
And I can't tell from that movie if you know anything about women at all, do you? And he said, no, but I'd like to learn. So I thought that was as good an answer as I could ever imagine.
And the project ensued.
Ta-da!
To get in the right frame of mind, the director surrounded himself with ladies. His producer became his girlfriend, Sandy Weintraub. Bob Rafelson's wife, Toby Rafelson, agreed to be his production designer, and George Lucas's wife, Marcia, became the editing director. Marcia Lucas said,
Marty called and asked if I would do his first studio feature. He was terrified of the studio executives, and the Warner was going to give him some old fuddy-duddy editor or a spy. The studios were known for having spies on projects. Marty liked to edit, and I felt like I was being hired to cut a movie, so I wouldn't cut it. So I let the director cut it. But I thought, if I'm ever going to get any real credit, I'm going to have to cut a movie for somebody besides George. Because if I'm cutting for my husband, they're going to think George lets his wife play around in the cutting room.
That's how Martin ended up with an excellent team, a $2 million budget, and a chance to prove himself to the studio.
That was it. I did it. I got a job as a singer. Are we rich?
Well, no, we're not rich yet, but we might be someday.
2 weeks before filming started, the director had found all the actors. Besides Burstyn, there was Harvey Keitel,
Hiya.
Chris Christopherson, and a young Jodie Foster.
So long, suckers.
Half-improvised rehearsals became Scorsese's habit when preparing for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. The actors had complete freedom, and each successful line or reaction was immediately added to the script. Martin would go on to use this method in all of his following films.
How did I get such a smart-ass kid?
He got pregnant.
The budget and support of a studio often fill directors with confidence, but also make them wary of the cost of failure. Scorsese worried a lot and exhausted the actors and film crew by doing dozens of takes. The extent of his eccentricity was exposed while filming at the ranch. The team had rented a farm, having paid the owners to take a week off. After 7 days, the owners returned, but when they opened the front door, Martin was still sweating over the finale.
I know what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing.
As soon as Burstyn had said her final line, the director insisted they repeat the take. 2 hours later, the owners started to hurry the director. Their irritation grew, and they started to comment on everything, making fun of the actors and tease the director about his lack of talent. Scorsese remembers this episode like a nightmare, because in front of his colleagues he was being belittled by a pair of farmers. But it was a learning experience, and still, Martin didn't give up and did not leave the house until he had gotten the results he wanted.
Aren't you going to open the door for me?
De Niro would often visit him on set. The actor wasn't just visiting his friend, they would talk about future projects. The director talked about making The Last Temptation of Christ, while Robert insisted on a biography about Jake LaMotta. A month later, their arguments moved from the set to the editing room. While Marcia Lucas was editing frames, Scorsese fought with the studio. The first casualty was the scene meant to be an homage to The Wizard of Oz.
To prove that I love you, I swear I don't know how.
Warner demanded that Martin's favorite moment be cut. All this after, for the first time in his career, he was allowed to design his own set decorations created by the legendary Citizen Kane producer, designer Daryl Silvera. The set alone cost $80,000. Only the threat that Martin would publicly rescind his participation in the film saved the scene. Sadly, it was the prologue that got the most negativity from the critics. The war with Biskind exhausted him too. Though Ellen was the only lead actress, she was also like one of the producers. Warner had basically created the project for her. The actress was involved in all the stages of the work, whether Scorsese wanted her there or not.
You're annoying me.
When he forbade Biskind from setting foot in the editing room, their relationship collapsed. It was the price the director had to pay to retain control over the film. Angry but not broken, he won the final battle. The screenplay's finale was a typical happily ever after. The couple walks into the sunset and the credits roll up the screen. Scorsese felt this was false and in a fit of rage tore the film. The studio had to reshoot the finale. The director knew that he would not be able to split the main characters and get his realistic ending, so he found a compromise. The finale followed the screenplay in everything except the scene with the sunset. However, the theatrical and fictitious moment at the dinner with the absurd applause was his way of turning it into a satire. That's how he got the illusionary happy ending, but basically wrote in their breakup in between lines. Before showing Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore to the studio, Martin went to New York and made a film for himself. It was a documentary interview where he talked to his parents about life as Italians in New York and the life of his ancestors in Sicily.
She came over, she said she almost died on a trip there. The boats were small, were very small, but they came, it took her over a month to get over here by boat.
It was a month until the premiere, but the director was no longer worried about the success of the film. Mean Streets had made him a reputation in Hollywood. There were dozens of producers and screenwriters dying to work with him, but he was aiming for Paul Schrader. Schrader had been trying to sell the rights of Taxi Driver for over a year and had already turned Scorsese down. Paul had been trying to get Brian De Palma and Steven Spielberg, but their tight schedules and tiny budget made them turn the project down. Then Schrader watched Mean Streets, changed his mind, and convinced Columbia Pictures to give Martin a chance. The only condition was that the main role would go to Robert De Niro. Scorsese had been dreaming that Travis Bickle be played by Harvey Keitel, and though at first he prickled at the condition, his desire to make the film was stronger than his pride. On the 9th of December 1974, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore premiered with surprising success. The picture garnered over $20 million and got 3 Oscar nominations. Ellen Burstyn had her revenge and won the award for Best Actress.
Ellen is in a play tonight in New York. She can't be here. She asked me to thank everyone concerned with the voting, the Academy who voted for her, also the entire cast and crew of Alice, and she also asked me to thank myself. Thank you.
That year, the second installment of The Godfather triumphed at the ceremony, and De Niro got an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. For Martin, whose presence the Academy had yet to acknowledge, this was bad news. He rejoiced for his friend's success, but in the contract for Taxi Driver, Robert was to be paid $35,000. However, he hadn't yet signed. After his victory, he could easily ask for 10 times more, which would have been a justified price for an Oscar winner. The budget did not allow for such luxuries, which would have meant that Martin did not hold up his side of the bargain. But despite opposing advice from his agent, the actor stuck to the first agreement and saved Taxi Driver.
Here's a man who would not take it anymore. A man who stood up against the scum, the cunts, the dogs, the filth, the shit. Here is someone who stood up.
In the spring of '75, Scorsese was getting ready to film, and De Niro went to Italy where he was filming Bertolucci's 1900.
Imagine the look on my father's face if he knew we were here together. Oof.
In between filming, he would return to the US and research for his role. He interviewed veterans at army bases and worked as a taxi driver in New York for 2 weeks, and then went to Schrader and raided his wardrobe. All of Travis's clothing belonged to his creator. Meanwhile, Martin was gathering an all-star team. In the script, the leading lady, Betsy, was described as a woman who looked like Sybil Shepherd. No one resembling Sybil had tried out, but one day Shepard's agent called Martin and asked, "I hear you're looking for a Sybil Shepherd type. Well, why don't you just hire Sybil?" And Scorsese answered, "Well, we can't afford her." However, the actress had only been acting in Peter Bogdanovich's comedies and wanted to explore other facets of her talent so badly that she agreed to a minimal salary.
Appreciate this, Betsy.
Oh, how De Niro would hate her on set. Jibes and barbs would give way to accusations of bad acting. The couple would grow to hate each other and never act together again. Jodie Foster, on the other hand, Robert considered the diamond in the rough, though her character and her casting was the subject of heated argument.
So what makes you so high and mighty? Will you tell me that?
But no, it goes without saying that the talented actress succeeded, though she had only turned 12 during shooting.
Want to make it like this?
Before reading the script, Jodie took a series of psychological tests. Then she saw a psychiatrist every week. The doctor made sure that the rehearsals and shooting schedule were not adversely affecting her. She was walked through every violent scene by the special effects director, who showed her that it was all an illusion. However, in the final violent scenes, she was forbidden to participate. A few of the scenes were deleted from the screenplay, and in others, the actress was replaced by her older sister. By the way, Jodie had help from the very girl whom Schrader had based on the character. Garth Avery even played Iris's friend in the film.
You looking for some action?
Yeah.
Martin offered the campaign manager role to Harvey Keitel, but the actor preferred to play the pimp on screen.
How's everything in the pimp business? Huh? Do I know you? No.
And even though the role was supposed to be a black character with 3 lines, Scorsese agreed and rewrote the text to give Harvey some more screen time.
I swear I'm clean. I'm just waiting here for a friend. You gonna bust me for nothing, man?
In the summer of '75, the beaches of the US emptied, thanks to the release of Jaws. But the real terror was on the streets of New York.
All the animals come out at night. Whores, skunk pussies, buggers, queens, fairies, dopers, junkies.
Michael Chapman's lens captured hundreds of sweaty people, tons of garbage and sewage, which was not part of the author's vision, nor the production designer's idea, but rather a garbage workers' strike. The strike lasted a few days, but because of the unusual heat, journalists would dub that July to be the worst in the history of the city. If the camera could have captured smells, then Taxi Driver would have been the stinkiest film ever. But even without that factor, Chapman was able to capture the atmosphere completely.
Whatever it is, he should clean up this city here, because this city here is like an open sewer, you know? It's full of filth and scum.
Travis? Travis.
The cinematographer first captured Scorsese's attention with his work in The Last Detail, plus his style reminded him of Godard. Michael even filmed the cup with the bubbling Alka-Seltzer in a direct allusion to the drama 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her. Chapman's main job was to depict the world through Bickle's eyes without drawing attention to him. During the talk with Betsy, the camera pans out from Travis and focuses on the dark street outside. Martin believes this is one of the most important scenes in the film because it's very painful to look at Travis, and the empty hallway is like his inner world.
I tried several times to call her, but after the first call, she wouldn't come to the phone any longer.
For the scene where they buy weapons, Sandy Weintraub invited a friend who brought his personal arsenal to the set and played the role of the gun salesman. The idea of filming the guns as though they were religious icons was masterfully executed by Chapman. However, the moment where Travis aims at the window is Robert's improvisation. Not the whole scene, but the finale where the gun is drawn to the random passers-by who happen to be in the frame. After filming that scene, the director befriended Stephen Prince because he became his weapon supplier for his pictures and sometimes played the role of a bodyguard or even a butler. Later, when Martin's drug addiction escalated, Stephen was one of the only people who could calm the director down.
I know you must think that I'm, You must think I'm pretty sick or something. You know, you must think I'm pretty sick.
The cocaine and the resulting paranoia led to a breakup with Sandy. But Martin did not stay lonely long and started dating Julia Cameron, who was a journalist writing an article about Taxi Driver during filming. 6 months after they met, they were married. But let's get back to the set. The number of improvisations was irritating to Paul Schrader, though Scorsese insisted that they continue to exist. De Niro's famous phrase is also an improvisation.
Talking to me? Then who the hell else are you talking to? Talking to me?
The director thought that Bob had been inspired by the scene with Marlon Brando from Reflections in a Golden Eye, but the actor was imitating Bruce Springsteen, who used to warm up the crowds at his concerts with similar phrases. Travis's order at the diner is an allusion to the serial killer Ed Gein.
I had black coffee and apple pie with a slice of melted yellow cheese.
He asked for apple pie with melted cheese in exchange for a confession. By the way, Ed was the prototype for Norman Bates, one of cinema's most famous maniacs.
Let them see what kind of a person I am.
And, of course, the music. Martin tried to convince Bernard Herrmann to do the soundtrack, the same person who composed the music for Citizen Kane. But the composer declined, thinking that the film was going to be about car racing. However, after he read the script, he changed his mind. After the orchestra had finished recording, Scorsese called Bernard and asked him to add one more detail, the one long and scary chord. And even though it meant paying the orchestra another whole day, the composer agreed. Soon after that session, the maestro died, leaving behind him one of the greatest works of his career. The final fight scene was the hardest. De Niro recalled that besides technical problems, humor got in the way and would derail their serious mood for hours. They weren't laughing because they found violence funny, but because they were anxious and a little frightened. But nobody was more anxious than Scorsese. The Motion Picture Association of America was on his case about the filming's rating and wanted to rate it X for mature viewers only. Movies like that are not released in commercial theaters, and grindhouse showings would not earn enough to break even. So the rating would have killed all chances of commercial success.
Cabby, just forget about this. It's nothing.
The head of Columbia Pictures predictably suggested that they cut out the scenes completely, as well as the one with the Alka-Seltzer, which he called an inappropriate advertisement of anti-hangover meds. This evaluation infuriated Martin, and he shut himself in the editing room. Just him, the film, a bottle of Dom Perignon, and a mound of cocaine. When he was about to give up, he invited 3 of his friends to help: Brian De Palma, John Milius, and Steven Spielberg.
I've never seen Marty so upset, verging on tears, but leaning towards rage. He shattered a glass sparklets bottle all over the kitchen floor. We were holding his arms trying to calm him down, finding out why he was so upset. He finally came out with the fact that Columbia had seen his movie and had hated the ending and wanted him to take out all the violence, the entire shootout, to cut away from the splintering fingers and the blood spouting and puddling. They felt the film was bound for an X rating, and he was being forced to Disneyize it.
Fuck out of here, man. Get out of here.
His friends tried to pacify him, but he was already on the warpath. First, they took the picture to some New York critics and then got some studio-bashing reviews ready. Then the company, United Artists, contacted him and offered to buy the distribution rights and release the movie without any changes or X ratings. In the end, Columbia compromised, and Martin was able to cut out only a few of the most violent frames and soften the tone of the picture, making the scene almost colorless, which actually worked in its favor. The MPA took pity and gave the film an R rating. On the 8th of February, 1976, Taxi Driver premiered. At noon on Manhattan at the Cinema One Theater, the doors opened to a mob of young people who looked exactly like Travis and who had been standing in line for 2 to 3 hours to see the film. Jodie Foster was denied entry without her parents. During the first weekend, the film made $60,000 in New York alone. Overall, it made $24 million million. 4 months later, the picture received a Palme d'Or at Cannes. A year later, it was nominated for 4 Oscars for Best Film, Actor, Actress, and Soundtrack. But the victor in '77 was Rocky, while Taxi Driver did not receive a single statuette. Critics were divided into 2 camps. The first was obsessed with the picture and dubbed Scorsese a genius, while the other camp was disturbed by the violence and political subtext. The film was seriously accused of propagating violence, despite the fact that only 4 people die over the course of the film, but it did have a negative impact. 6 years later, the film inspired John Hinckley Jr. to attempt killing Ronald Reagan. Before he wounded the President of the United States, John stalked Jodie Foster at Yale University and wrote her a letter where he promised to impress her with a certain deed.
I felt very shocked, very frightened, and very distracted.
After being arrested, Hinckley spent 36 years in a psych ward and was discharged on the 10th of December 2016. Meanwhile, Martin began working on the musical New York, New York.
These vagabond shoes.
A $14 million budget, complete creative freedom, and filming before even finishing a script. A credit of trust which Scorsese had never even dreamed of. Unfortunately, this coincided with probably the worst period of his life. Cocaine replaced his first love, not to mention that he started an affair with his lead actress, Liza Minnelli, while his pregnant wife, Julia Cameron, waited for him at home.
I know that.
The filming process fell apart almost as soon as it started. Scorsese was incapable of managing the set and the actors. A fight scene from the movie landed De Niro, Minnelli, and the director in the emergency room.
I don't care. Now I'll get you.
Later, Martin made 150 extras in costumes wait for him while he finished a talk with the psychoanalyst.
I started playing with drugs when I was doing New York, New York. For me, it was just the beginning of going into an abyss for about 2 years and coming out of it just barely alive.
The actor's improvisations, which he loved so, resulted in almost all of the material besides the musical numbers being comprised of disjointed dialogue.
Number 1, number 3, and number 2. Wait, I'm getting confused.
This made the editing process hell, since there were hundreds of scenes with no obvious connection.
Sometimes you really are hard to understand. You really are.
You're hard to understand. Don't change the subject.
De Niro learned to play the saxophone and mustered all the talent he could, but saw that the picture was heading towards disaster anyways. Scorsese stopped hearing criticism, rejected all advice, and allowed Liza Minnelli to rewrite the script as she saw fit.
What are you talking about? You just ruined it for me.
The result was 2.5 hours of chaos, which the director dubbed the first noir musical in history. The studio was counting on a traditional 40s-style reel, happy and light, but got a dark drama, which would be the worst flop of the year. New York, New York didn't even make 50% of its budget, and Martin spiraled into depression. He broke up with Lisa, and soon after Julia gave birth to their daughter Dominica, he left his family and found comfort in his only remaining love, cocaine. The next 2 years were a fog. Having brought the documentary The Last Waltz to Cannes, Martin ordered cocaine from Paris by private plane and told journalists, no cocaine, no interview. And though the musical documentary In the Spirit of Woodstock was a masterpiece, Scorsese, who didn't even accept a dime to shoot it, was the object of great concern among those close to him.
I was always angry, throwing glasses, provoking people. Really unpleasant to be around. I always found, no matter what anybody said, something to take offense at. I'd be the host, but at some point during the evening, I'd flip out, just like when I'm shooting.
For over half a year, Martin's friend Mardik worked on the screenplay for Raging Bull, but the director didn't even read it. In the end, he suggested sending it to Paul Schrader for finishing touches, who decided to rewrite it completely. When he finished, the Taxi Driver author saw that all the characters seemed loathsome and there wasn't enough humanity in the material.
I don't know you.
Listen, let me ask you something. Were you with the Kolo with him, huh? Huh?
Were you at the Copa, huh?
However, Scorsese was wasting his life and fed the producers lies about how production was just about to start. He had no desire to shoot a sports drama. Plus, he was finally able to get the rights to one of his favorite novels, The Gangs of New York. But not a single studio wanted to finance such a huge project, especially without a script. Disillusioned, he traveled around the country with his new girlfriend, the young actress Isabella Rossellini. At premieres and parties, he would pester people with his haughtiness and drug-induced ramblings. All the work he'd done on Raging Bull, which was one little test take with Robert in the ring, Martin took to Michael Chapman. To make sure it was different than Rocky stylistically, they decided to film in black and white. It was an important detail, but not very productive for 8 months of preparation. His love story with cocaine finally ended, beginning with the Telluride Film Festival. Martin bought some cheap local product and an hour later had a fit and started bleeding from his throat. When he returned to New York, he collapsed and was hospitalized. Because he was constantly mixing asthma meds, antidepressants, and cocaine, the director had almost no blood platelets left. Rossellini had to leave for a shoot in Italy and was sure that she was seeing her emaciated 100-pound fiancé for the last time. However, the doctors helped, and he watched films all day in the hospital, which reminded him of his first, most important addiction. One day, De Niro came to visit him and told him everything on his mind. Perhaps it was this talk which saved Scorsese. Robert De Niro said to him,
"What's the matter with you, Marty? Don't you want to live to see if your daughter's gonna grow up and get married? Are you gonna be one of those flash-in-the-pan directors who does a couple of good movies and it's over for them? You know we can make this picture. We can do a really great job, so are we gonna do it or not?"
At that point, United Artists Studios had already given up on Schrader's screenplay and was ready to dump the project. After Rocky, a gloomy drama without any heroic characters would have attracted only a crazy producer. Martin and Robert decided to rewrite the text themselves. They went to St. Martin's, where De Niro took care of his exhausted friend, as though he was a nurse. He helped him to kick his habit and write a work of genius. After 14 days, the studio accepted the script. A few times a week, they met with the prototype. Jake LaMotta was unpredictably explosive and moody and surprised them with his nasty personality. Once in Martin's hotel room, Jake jumped up and started banging his head against the wall. That day, De Niro realized how to play his character. The rage of the boxer was caused by partial deafness, which meant he had to always ask someone to repeat themselves, and this triggered his anger at the drop of a hat.
Shut up! Shut up! I'll fucking take care of you later! Shut up!
Later, the actor sparred with LaMotta over 1,000 times, then participated in an amateur tournament and won 2 of the 3 fights. While Robert was consumed with preparations for the long-awaited film, Martin was consumed with fear. After the failure of the musical, he thought that this was his last chance in the film industry. Only one thought helped him conquer his anxiety. "I'll film it so that I have no regrets." The director immediately started to make his dreams a reality. Despite the producer's preferences, he chose Joe Pesci for the role of Joey.
Why don't you do me a favor, huh? Do something for me. Just put your hands up. I want to show you something. Put your hands up. What the fuck is so hard about that?
The actor had impressed him with his work on the film Family Enforcer, which is why Martin wanted to work with him.
This is just the beginning.
Since he thought the end of his career was nigh, he wanted to do it.
You understand? If you win, you win. If you lose, you still win.
Scorsese chose Kathy Moriarty after an open casting call. The actress debuted in Raging Bull.
You sucked his cock.
Yeah, I sucked his cock and everybody else on the fucking street, too. What do you want? You're nothing but a fat pig, selfish fool.
Fast forwarding a little, Moriarty and Pesci were both nominated for an Oscar for their roles. But in the spring of '79, no one was thinking about Oscar victories. On set, the director behaved as though he was the main hero of the picture. He threw tantrums and argued with Chapman so fiercely that chairs flew. The cinematographer perfectly depicted the blood and the oversized ring, creating a feeling of loneliness and futility. The team worked until every idea was perfectly implemented. That is how 5 weeks dedicated to filming the fights turned into 10, even though the result was 6 minutes of screen time. Unlike other popular films about boxing, the camera was placed inside the ring for the first time.
LaMotta back up. LaMotta continues to bore in. LaMotta out of the bottom.
This forced the cameraman to rehearse no less than the actors. Even though the opening scene is like a stunt, Chapman ran behind the scenes and detonated dozens of bulbs to imitate the crowds of journalists. The last fight scene was modeled after the storyboard from the shower scene in Psycho. This is where the director took the pace and rapidly changing frames, because he believed that to be one of the scariest scenes in the history of film, a feeling he tried to recreate with the fight. Even though the result was better than their wildest dreams, their relationship became so strained that after Raging Bull, Michael never filmed for Scorsese again.
This one loose.
Martin took the raw material daily to the editing room and worked on the draft. For the first time since Woodstock, he legally worked with Thelma Schoonmaker. In order to do this, he had to hire a whole team of Manhattan lawyers and pressure the Guild. There's nothing you won't do for a film that you think will be your last. He even got advice from Thelma's future husband, director Michael Powell, about how to film an aging and overweight LaMotta. In The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, Powell was able to add weight to his main character by changing the camera angle, changing his hairstyle, and stuffing his clothes.
But let me tell you that in 40 years' time, you'll be an old gentleman too.
Robert didn't appreciate these ideas because they didn't fit with the realistic style of the film. De Niro suggested that he really gained the weight in real life. Bob loved the realism on the screen, which was not good news for Joe Pesci. They literally hit each other with full strength while filming, and during a sparring session, Robert actually broke Joe's rib. The scene when this occurred made it into the final edit. So filming took a new turn for De Niro when he took a gastro tour of Italy, and after 2 months, gained over 40 pounds.
I'm tired of worrying about weight all the time. That's all I used to think about was weight. After a while, you realize other things in life.
His last stop was Rome, where on the 13th of September, Robert attended the wedding of Isabella Rossellini and Martin Scorsese. An exhausting 2 weeks of filming followed. The friendship between the director and the lead actor was strained. De Niro was exhausted by every take, and Scorsese was trying to finish the remaining scenes as quickly as possible.
Come on, champ. Come on, wake up. Wake up, champ.
The relationship was hanging by a thread, but the desire to finish the film was their priority.
Go get him, champ.
The last take was followed by 9 months of post-production. Even the sound effects recording was haunted by legend. It was said that after the sound was mixed, the editor destroyed all the original cassettes. This was so that no one could use the team's work in another film.
A left and a right to the head, a hard left hand to the body, and Robinson is driven out of the ring for the first knockdown of his career.
The studio bosses put out feelers for distributors, and the producers were busy fighting for Martin's complete creative freedom. Even the last quote from the Bible reflects his deep emotional struggle. On the 26th of May, Haig Manoogian died, Scorsese's friend and mentor. The last lines were dedicated to him, as was the entire film. The premiere of Raging Bull was on the 14th of November, 1980, and the rolling credits were greeted with a standing ovation. After the showing, Jake LaMotta asked his wife, "Was I really like that?" Vicky answered, "You were worse."
The question of commercialism is a source of worry. One must make a choice. Must it be a matter of either setting your sights on winning an Academy Award and becoming a millionaire, or making only the movies you want to make and starving to death?
I'm on the move, I'm going up. I'm a man on a mission with no missions, and I'm looking for love. Oh, I'm just looking for love. It's gotta be against the law to look this damn good. Cause baby, I feel real good, and I wish I would. It's gotta be against the law to look this damn good, baby. Everybody watch out.
The studio failed to advertise Raging Bull well, and the picture brought in just over $23 million. And even raving reviews and 6 Oscar nominations didn't help.
Raging Bull, the odyssey of a fighter's victories in the ring and his losses in life.
On the eve of the awards, Robert celebrated the second win of his
I
career.
want to thank my mother and father for having me, and my grandmother and grandfather for having them.
And after a 10-year hiatus, Thelma Schoonmaker won a statuette.
I want to thank, first of all, Martin Scorsese. He edited this film with me every minute of the time.
The Academy finally noticed Martin, who was nominated for Best Director for the first time, but the victory went to Robert Redford. Ordinary People beat Raging Bull for Best Picture also. The defeat was as painful as a punch from LaMotta. Martin knew that he wouldn't be appreciated by such wide audiences as his friends Coppola, Spielberg, and Lucas. But until that day, he had thought that at least the Academy and film critics and cinephiles were on his side. Now he had no reason to believe in success. The film community once again rejected his profession of love. The crushed director agreed to his next project without pausing. Though he almost immediately rejected it, the king of comedy would serve as a tragedy in his relationship with De Niro.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rupert Pupkin.
Martin Scorsese said,
We had explored everything that we could with each other in Raging Bull. I should not have done the King of Comedy. I should have waited for something that came from me. I found that I had to convince myself every day to be a pro and going to work, and I disappointed myself. Like very often I was late in the morning, and that sort of thing. And the picture went over budget.
Well, I find that strange, you know. But it's typical.
Nonetheless, Scorsese maintained that Rupert Pupkin was the best work De Niro had done with him. But unfortunately, it separated them for the next 8 years.
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
The duo was tired and needed a break. Instead of resting, they got a gigantic budget of $19 million for a comedy film following 2 commercial failures on the director's part.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.
For the second time in his career, a credit of trust only increased his level of anxiety. A few weeks before filming, Scorsese once again ended up in hospital. The doctors diagnosed him with exhaustion and pneumonia. As soon as he was discharged, the director went to the set. Because of his health, he was only able to film 3 hours a day, so the job stretched out for 5 months. The only silver lining was Jerry Lewis. The comedian replaced Johnny Carson, who had turned down the role, and gave the best acting of his career.
I really believe this. I think once you get over the initial shyness, you're going to be okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
De Niro drew him into the world of improvisation and introduced him to the Stanislavski method. Before the scene in the house outside the city, Robert teased Lewis with anti-Semitic jokes, which helped Jerry not have to pretend to be angry.
Yeah, all right, so I made a mistake.
So did Hitler.
This scene was complete improvisation, and the actors did not use a single line from the script.
I'm gonna work 50 times harder, and I'm gonna be 50 times more famous than you.
Then you're gonna have idiots like you playing your life.
That's right.
Right.
Yes.
Scorsese was satisfied, but Lewis could not stand the director's methods. In the beginning, he would arrive on set in the morning and wait for Martin all day. The director would arrive around 4 in the afternoon and say that they were filming a scene that didn't include Lewis. After a week of this, the actor couldn't stand it anymore and demanded pay for all the days he spent waiting, or else he would quit the film. He also asked what was the point of hiring someone if one didn't require their services.
Did anyone ever tell you you're a moron?
Scorsese paid him for his time and convinced Lewis that he was needed.
I really have to ask you that. How do you do it?
By the way, the decision to keep Jerry's name was not a coincidence. Lewis suggested doing that so that during the scenes shot on the street, if anyone yelled out his name, it would be as though fans were talking to his character.
How are you? Hi there.
In this scene, there were no actors besides the driver and the woman.
I can't wait.
In the scene when Rupert and Masha are arguing, they stumble upon a gang of kids. The gang was played by Gerard Depardieu and Scorsese's favorite band, The Clash. After 4.5 months of shooting, Martin had over 180 miles of film. The amount of material was horrifying, with 20 or 30 takes per scene. For the first 2 months, he didn't even edit 1 minute.
I think it's good. You're laughing at that? That's very good. Do me a favor.
In addition, he continued to feel sick. He had to go to the doctor daily, and treatment lasted for 3 years. In conclusion, his marriage with Isabella unraveled. Her career really started to take off. Rossellini left her husband and returned to Europe. The King of Comedy was widely released a year after it had finished filming. It made $2.5 million, a sum which was 7 times less than its budget. It was the biggest failure of the year and Martin's third in a row. Martin was one of the producers and lost some of his own savings. The critics also reacted icily because they'd expected much more from the celebrity duo.
Thank you very much. We'll discuss the other things. That's your problem. Thank you very much. Nice talking to you. What?
In November of '82, at the Odeon restaurant, the director was celebrating his 40th birthday. Although celebrating might be too strong a word. The divorce, the failure of his film, and bankruptcy were not the best backdrop for a party. In the middle of the party, Coppola tried to encourage his friend. Francis had just lost his film studio. American Zoetrope was about to declare bankruptcy.
Marty, you need to calm down. You're only broke. I owe $50 million.
Martin calmed down and got inspired by a new idea. The screen adaptation of Nikos Kazantzakis' novel had been tugging at his imagination ever since Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. He had dreamed of filming a vulnerable drama that would depict Jesus' humanity and the hardships which the child of God had to face. So he asked Paul Schrader to write a script based on the book. Schrader fulfilled his request back in '78. Unfortunately, a script with contradicting religious themes from a director who was famous for violent films and had tanked the last 3 did not attract investors. However, when Raging Bull got 8 Oscar nominations in '81, Paramount decided to take a risk and set aside $14 million for the project. Of course, they were expecting to see De Niro in the role of Jesus, but after the conflicts on the set of The King of Comedy, the actor declined to work on the project. At the same time, the studio was bombarded with angry letters from religious organizations. Spiritual leaders called for a boycott of the film that hadn't even begun shooting. The team packed its bags for the 3-month-long filming trip to Israel, which would ensue in 4 weeks. While the paint on the set was still drying and the tailors were working on the costumes, they had to return their tickets. The project was cancelled. It was a knife in the back which caused Scorsese to reject every Paramount project for the next 16 years, even when its leadership changed. His years in Hollywood had taught Martin to be tough. This time, he didn't spiral into depression or have a fit. He just wanted to make a film.
Me too. Me too. Okay. I'll see you later.
The owner of a major music label in Los Angeles, media magnate David Geffen, was widening his influence in Hollywood with his own film company, which would unite with Steven Spielberg 10 years later to become DreamWorks Studios. But in the early 80s, Geffen Pictures made a lot of money on the comedy risky business and was ready to invest in new projects. The intriguing plot of a funny thriller called After Hours caught his attention. Joseph Minion had originally written it for a college assignment. His professor, the Yugoslavian director Dusan Mekhijev, gave him the highest grade.
I think he's just waiting to be discovered.
The producers Amy Robinson and Griffin Dunn got in contact with Scorsese and convinced him to make the movie. He liked the plot, but what he liked even more was the studio's willingness to invest $5 million and guarantee him creative freedom. The only condition was that Griffin Dunn was to play the main role.
I don't know what to say.
The director agreed and squeezed as much out of the actor as he could, forbidding him to smoke, have sex, or sleep more than 3 hours a night during filming.
I gotta sleep. You understand that, don't you?
Martin created a parody on the classic Hitchcock story, an innocent man falsely accused.
They're all trying to kill me. I mean, I just wanted to leave. You know, my apartment, maybe meet a nice girl. And now I've got to die for it, you know?
The soundtrack copied Bernard Herrmann's style. And the camera movement was as though copied from the thriller Marnie. There was also the exaggerated feeling of suspense and the many close-up shots. The effect was created by Michael Ballhaus, whose ability to film quickly and creatively amazed the director. The main obstacle was the scene with the keys. The keys falling on the actor was filmed for real. During the first take, they were not able to get the shot that they wanted, and the director and producers did not want to risk filming it again. Everyone was afraid to get Griffin hurt, except for Griffin, who insisted that they film it again.
I went, really? I got one more. We can do one more.
Just throw down the keys.
But Ballhaus found a way out of the problem by filming a few more frames from other angles and speeding up the moment with a quick movement of the camera. Paul's intriguing dialogue with the bouncer is almost a word-for-word quote from the novel Before the Law by Franz Kafka.
It's not much, but it's all I've got.
I'll take your money because I don't want you to feel you left anything untried.
While we're on the subject of quotes, it turned out after the release that the first half of the film was identical to comedian Joe Frank's monologue. The plot, characters, and even the flying $20 bill.
Excuse me, I just...
Frank sued the studio and got $1 million. As for unexpected twists on set, the finale just wouldn't come together. The idea to leave with the retreating car just seemed too cruel. Thelma Schoonmaker's husband, Michael Powell, suggested that they bring Tom back to work. It was a crazy and completely illogical option, but they filmed it. It wasn't a sad ending, but during the pre-screenings, the audiences reacted positively. Martin gave up, but left the public food for thought. After Paul returns to work, the camera spins around the office and the credits roll. But when the main character's table comes into view again, he's gone. Is this a hint that the finale is just the character's imagination or a mistake? Well, that's up to you. After Hours brought the studio $10 million and Martin a Best Director award at the Cannes Festival. Scorsese was reinstated to the Hollywood elite, and his wave of success washed him up at Paul Newman's door.
This used to be a nice, average, bad neighborhood. Now look at it.
After 20 years, the actor was going to film a sequel to The Hustler.
I'm the best you ever seen, Fats. I'm the best there is. Now, even if you beat me, I'm still the best.
Newman believed Raging Bull to be the best sports drama in history and suggested that they do a similar screen adaptation of the book The Color of Money. Paul had neither studio, budget, nor script, but convinced the director to take the film.
There's something at the end of this. I wouldn't even tell you to do it unless the payoff was phenomenal.
According to him, filming a movie like this would be showing Hollywood his ability to work on mainstream projects, something Martin had yet to do in his 25-year career. They chose the author Richard Price for the script, a writer without film industry experience. Price recalls that the duo sucked all the life out of him. First, he wrote and sent his drafts to Scorsese, who added his comments and would send the pages back. Richard would change it and take the drafts to Newman, who would then give his comments, and Price would do it all over again. After 36 meetings, the text was finally accepted.
Very good stuff.
The project was picked up by 20th Century Fox, but the bosses didn't like the script or the young Tom Cruise whom Paul had brought to the movie.
You are going to be one of the greats, kiddo. One of the greats. I got a good feeling about this.
Yeah? That's why no one was against it when Touchstone Pictures offered to buy the project out. The new investors had some conditions for Paul and Martin. They would get a budget of $14.5 million and 50 days to film. Penalties would be paid by Scorsese and Newman, and they would return a third of their salaries if the film failed at the box office.
You find a newcomer with a better deal than that, you come to me, we talk.
The Color of Money became the only film made by Scorsese which finished filming a day before the deadline, which saved them $1.5 million.
It was beautiful. It was fucking beautiful.
As for the filming process itself, Tom's effort is worth mentioning. For 3 months, he practiced playing pool, and besides the trick with the jump, he did all his own shots.
Everybody's doing it.
Martin was sure that the actor could have even done that trick, but didn't want to waste valuable time training him.
I think you're wrong, man. You know?
It's also worth mentioning all the cameos, from billiard stars to a young Forrest Whitaker to Iggy Pop. And of course, the scene with the cue.
Doom.
which led John Carmack to name his game Doom. The way Vincent beat his competitors seemed to John the perfect illustration of how his shooter was going to fare in the game industry. The picture also introduced Scorsese to his next wife. The producer, Barbara DeFina, lived with the director for 6 years and worked on his films even after their divorce. On the 17th of October, 1986, the film premiered. It would go on to make over $50 million at the box office.
You smell what I smell? Smoke?
Money.
Increase the profits of every billiards club in America, and bring Paul Newman the only Oscar of his career.
Pool excellence is not about excellent pool. It's about becoming someone.
In addition, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio and Richard Price would also get nominated. Martin and Richard would continue to collaborate for the next project, the short Bad, a screen adaptation of the song of the same name by Michael Jackson. The King of Pop had planned to film the clip in Brooklyn, which is why he invited the King of New York to film. Price wrote the script based on real events, the murder of a black student who was supposedly trying to rob an undercover policeman.
Black kid, 17, from Harlem, poor, with another black youth, tries to rob a white man, who turns out to be a plainclothes cop.
The main role was played by Michael himself, and Wesley Snipes debuted. It was also the last project done together with Michael Chapman. The visual aspect was copied from West Side Story and was no less sweeping. And the final cost of production was just over $2 million. Only 14 clips in history have been more expensive.
You gotta be kidding me.
The success of The Color of Money and the music video Bad gave Martin his confidence back, and he decided to resurrect The Last Temptation of Christ. The script had been gathering dust for 6 years until Universal Studios finally breathed life into it. In comparison to the conditions that Paramount had offered, the proposal seemed awful. The budget was half the amount, and filming was to be moved from Israel to the less expensive Morocco.
John the Baptist sequence. And the only river left in Morocco, I think.
In return, the director agreed to make a commercial film for them in a few years. Scorsese was ready to agree to any conditions as long as he could make his dream come true. The original candidates for the main roles were Aidan Quinn, Sting, and Ray Davis, who all rejected the project and were replaced with William Dafoe, David Bowie, and Harvey Keitel.
Every day you have a different plan. First it's love, then it's the axe, and now you have to die.
Mary Magdalene was to be played by either Madonna or Kim Basinger, but the singer did not make it past auditions, and the actress didn't want to depict a femme fatale. After that, he invited Barbara Hershey, with whom he had filmed a crucifixion scene 15 years ago. While filming, the director established a dictatorship. He forbade curse words and made the actors stop smoking. This left the paparazzi without any pictures of Bible characters holding cigarettes. For the main smoker, William Dafoe, this was the first and easiest obstacle. Filming had to continue according to schedule, and the actor had to film the scene with the cobra while suffering from a terrible flu.
You're here to trick me.
Trick you?
Later, Dafoe overdid it with the eye drops, which he was using to widen his pupils to give him an unusual countenance. Because of the overdose, the actor lost his sight for 3 days. Of course, there were some mystical moments. The finale stops abruptly because of some ruined film. Scorsese maintains that he found the defect in the most important part of the movie when he was already editing and couldn't do anything about it. Coincidence or divine providence, we may never know, but the effect worked. Of course, the main events connected to the Temptation of Christ occurred after it finished filming.
We cannot permit this movie to be shown in the United States or anywhere in the world.
Religious groups tried everything from boycotts to threats. Many churchgoers were offended by the explicit scenes during Jesus' visions and the liberal interpretation of the Bible. Whole cinema chains refused to show the movie. In one of the theaters in France, the showing was disturbed by arson which destroyed the building. Things were not much better in the States. thousands of protesters marched against the film, and the founder of Campus Crusade, Bill Bride, offered Universal Studios $10 million to hand over every copy of the film so that he could burn them.
And when I saw the 5-minute documentary that they showed, or compilation of all these people screaming about the film, and I just sat there and realized that this picture is gone. Finished.
After the premiere, the real bullying began. Martin had to be accompanied by bodyguards at every event connected to the film. He even came to the Oscars with a bodyguard. Scorsese's film was nominated in only one category, Best Director. It's worth mentioning that it was extremely rare for a film to be nominated in this category and not be nominated for anything else. The humble profit at the box office was not a surprise.
I never expected to make any money anyway, and that's why I spent so little on it.
Not long before the picture's release, Scorsese, together with Woody Allen and Steven Spielberg, decided to resurrect a popular 50s cinema genre, the anthology. Touchstone Pictures gave each director $5 million and guaranteed them creative freedom in return for 3 shorts, which would be united by one theme, which in the case of New York Stories was the city itself. A few months before the project began, Spielberg left the project because he needed more time to edit Indiana Jones. The vacant spot was taken by Francis Ford Coppola, who made a reel based on the script written by his 16-year-old daughter.
Hector is our family butler and my guardian angel. He takes care of me when my parents are traveling, which is most of the time.
Martin's segment was a novella about an artist whose mistress's assistant has an affair with a comedian. One of the unique aspects of the picture was its acting ensemble. Besides Nick Nolte and Rosanna Arquette, who played the leads, the short also starred Peter Gabriel, the singer Debbie Harry, and of course Steve Buscemi, who wrote his own monologue for the stand-up portion.
Then the cops come by and they say, well, how come you killed this guy? I said, well, he stepped on my foot. They're going to think I overreacted.
Unfortunately, the forgotten anthology genre failed at the box office.
And, I don't like it.
But Scorsese did not give up, especially since Warner Brothers had approved his idea to adapt the novel Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi for the screen. Back when he was working on The Color of Money while skimming through the New York Times, the director had stumbled upon a review for Wise Guy. That same day, he made a few calls and got a copy of the book about the rise and fall of the gangster Henry Hill, even before it was available in stores. A few days later, he was already at Pileggi's door. As soon as the door opened, Martin declared that he wanted to make a movie out of the book. The author replied that he'd never imagined any other director but him for the job. They worked on the script together, but because of the time-consuming film schedule of The Last Temptation of Christ, they had to put it off. A year later, he didn't want to go back to a gangster story and considered scrapping it altogether.
Because what's the point of making another gangster picture?
But his friends Thelma Schoonmaker and Michael Powell insisted that he follow his goal, resulting in perhaps the greatest mafia biopic ever.
To me, being a gangster was better than being president of the United States.
His interest was piqued again by a new take on the text. Schoonmaker suggested that they create a non-linear plot line and get rid of the clear chronological order of events. In the process, the title also changed, because in those 2 years, Brian De Palma's Wise Guy was released, as well as a TV show of the same name. That was how Scorsese came to direct the crime drama, Goodfellas.
He's a good fella, he's one of us. You understand? We were good fellas, wise guys.
The bosses at Warner wanted to find a first-class actor for the lead. Martin invited Al Pacino to play the role of Jimmy Conway, but he said no because he didn't want to continue to play the stereotypical gangsters. Ironically, in the same year, he played a typical mafia gangster in the crime comedy, Dick Tracy.
Boys, we're back in business!
When the search was not successful, the director went to his old friend, Robert De Niro, for advice. When he asked him who he saw playing Jimmy, the actor replied, "Me." The duo's reunion charmed the studio, and they immediately gave the director a $25 million budget. De Niro didn't stop there and helped him find an actor to play Henry Hill.
Get the guy from Something Wild.
You're right. You're right.
Ray Liotta waited for approval for over a year and turned down the opportunity to play Harvey Dent in Batman. The auditions didn't impress Scorsese, but he was convinced by accident. At the Venice Film Festival after the last Temptation of Christ showing, Martin was walking surrounded by bodyguards, and Liotta walked up to him through the crowd, even though security pushed him away like a cloying fan. However, Ray was not deterred and continued to try. That was when Scorsese decided to hire him, because Henry Hill was famous for keeping his cool even during the most aggressive situations.
Karen. Just put it down.
Lorraine Bracco, Harvey Keitel's wife, got the female lead.
Some nerve standing me up. Nobody does that to me. Who the hell do you think you are? Frankie Valli or some kind of big shot?
And Tommy DeVito was played by Joe Pesci. After Raging Bull, Martin had found the ideal companion for De Niro.
Huh? You gonna get made? We're gonna work for this guy one day. He's gonna be a boss.
Before shooting started, the sound editor received 43 songs from Scorsese for the soundtrack. He had been compiling the playlist ever since he'd read the book. In the spring of 1989, in Martin's old neighborhood in Queens, they started shooting Goodfellas.
Hey guys, roll, action!
I could do anything. I knew everybody and everybody knew me.
As was his custom, most of the dialogue is improvised, and some of the scenes Scorsese created as they went. The scene with the cold reaction to being complimented is actually a story from the life of Joe Pesci.
Tommy, no, you got it all wrong.
Oh, Anthony. He's a big boy. He knows what he said. What'd you say? Right. Funny how?
When he was young, he worked as a waiter and accidentally and naively showed his appreciation of the funny behavior of a real gangster. Between takes, the actor reminisced about that situation, and the director decided then and there to film it. The director only warned Ray Liotta, which is why the film crew and the extras watched what was happening with sincere curiosity.
How do I know? You said I'm funny. How the fuck am I funny? What the fuck is so funny about me? Tell me. Tell me what's funny.
Speaking of extras, it's worth mentioning that it turned out that dozens of representatives from the mafia world actually took part. Scorsese fans got on set by pretending to be amateur actors, and in the accounting department at Warner, they noticed that the extras were using fake social security numbers as well as pseudonyms. Fat Andy, on the other hand, was played by cop Louis Ippolito.
And then there was Mo Black's brother, Fat Andy.
His father, uncle, and brother were all mafia, and in 2005 it turned out that Louis himself wasn't above breaking the law. The policeman was given life in prison for racketeering, extortion, and 8 murders.
Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa were sentenced to life in prison with no possibility for parole.
The original film prototypes helped its production. There was an anonymous advisor on set who knew all of the gangsters personally, and Henry Hill and De Niro spoke on the phone every day, where De Niro would ask about the smallest details of his behavior, like how he held a cigarette or a glass, even how he poured his ketchup. Hill was so involved in the picture that after the premiere, he couldn't hold himself back, and he let the paparazzi know where he was. Because of this, the US government excluded him from their witness protection program.
Everybody had their hands out. Everything was for the taking.
And now it's all over.
The main tests of the director's skill was the long shot at the Copacabana Club, where Martin had celebrated his graduation 30 years prior.
Hey, how's the weekend going? I know you're waiting for me. I'll be right with you.
This scene was inspired by a similar method from Brian De Palma's Untouchables.
When he sees coercion, when he sees crime, he can say...
In order to get the desired effect, it took the director 7 takes, which took 3 days of shooting. The 6th attempt didn't cut it because the legendary comedian Henny Youngman forgot his lines.
I'm glad to be here.
Besides the long shots, the director was worried about the wardrobe.
Hi, Mom, what do you think? Look at my shoes, aren't they great?
My God. You look like a gangster.
This obsession was bordering on absurd. For example, he would not begin shooting until he personally retied Liotta's tie or insisted they reshoot because one of the mafia extras was disheveled or ragged. The hardest scene for Ray was the one where he has cocaine withdrawal because the director had to try and explain the sensation to an actor who had never experienced something like that and help him to act naturally. Surprisingly, the dominating figure of the set was Joe Pesci.
What the fuck are you looking at?
His improvisations and unexpected remarks and dramatic scenes. The death of Spider, Joe dubbed the most difficult scene in his career.
You let this fucking punk get away with that? What's the matter? What's the world coming to?
In order to find the right motivation for that act, he spent months reading the biography of Tommy DeSimone. After the premiere, Hill said that Pesci had played him perfectly.
Very funny, guys. Here's a leg. Here's a wing. What do you like, the leg or the wing, Henry?
Considering the actor is 11 inches shorter and twice as skinny, that praise was impressive.
Why don't you just leave it alone now? I mean, I understand what you said. You know, the guy's talented. Leave it at that.
Even the final scene with Tommy's shot was created in the moment. It was not just an allusion to the great train robbery, but another typical focus on the main character. As for the scene with Pesci with the young and not yet famous Samuel L. Jackson, with time, it would achieve cult status.
Yeah, you're always fucking late. You're late for your own fucking funeral.
The editing of the film was influenced by Martin's love of the movie Jules and Jim. That was where he got the idea for the voice behind the camera and the stop motion.
Avant de vous connaître tous les deux, je ne riais jamais. Je faisais des têtes comme ça.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Don't say you have to go. Don't say you need to run. I'll stop the clock on Central Station and we can have a drink.
Down! I'll get it! I'll get it, money!
He's gonna be working. Okay? Oh, sounds good. Right.
Now take me to jail.
Surprisingly, the violent and bloody parade didn't mortify the Motion Picture Association. In order to give Goodfellas an R rating, they only required that they cut out half a second of material.
I don't want to get blood on your floor.
The studio bosses, however, were another problem altogether. After the pre-screenings, the film got the worst reviews in the history of Warner Brothers.
The numbers were so low, it was comical.
Despite the reaction, on the 19th of September 1990, the reel was released to the public without any changes.
It's fucking great. What nice.
Mr. Conway!
Goodfellas won over audiences and went down in the history of cinema. Critics sung the praise of the director. It was the reaction he'd been trying to get for decades. It was the pinnacle of the genre that sparked an interest in gangster films for the next 20 years. The picture was able to eclipse the third installment of The Godfather, which was released 3 months later. And though, yes, the Oscars were mostly dominated by Dances with Wolves by Kevin Costner, Joe Pesci got a statuette that reflected the strength of the movie.
Oh, it's my privilege, thank you.
Perhaps the loss hurt Martin's feelings once more, but this time he really believed that he had achieved his best as a director. Thankfully, Martin was wrong.